Hello and welcome to another episode of Scale SaaS. I'm your host, Ali Jamal. We sit down with founders and leaders who are reshaping industries through technology and innovation. Today, we are exploring a fascinating topic, the future of team memory, and how AI might act as a collective brain for organizations. We all know the frustration. Knowledge gets lost in Slack threads, onboarding takes forever, and critical lessons are forgotten and repeated. What if AI could change that? Before we dive in, I want to share a bit about my today's guest. Catherine Ming is not only the co-founder and CEO of Miilab, she is also an MIT graduate with a strong track record of turning bold ideas into practical solutions. Her academic foundation and entrepreneurial journey give her a unique perspective of how technology can reshape the way teams work. Catherine, it's a real privilege to have you here today.
Hi, Ali. Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here and share a little bit more about Miilab, about team memory, memory and context in general for agents and for humans.
Right. Okay. So, Catherine, what inspired you to create Miilab? Was there a defining moment when you realized that this problem had to be solved differently?
Yeah, as you sort of alluded to at Miilab, we build AI agents with persistent memory and context. And I first thought about it concretely this way while speaking with one of my professors at MIT on the topic of AI for information retrieval. What's holding back retrieval is not search, it's actually memory. So a persistent adaptive memory layer that captures answers as they're created and makes them reusable as context for both humans and AI agents. So at the time, my co-founder and I were working on an agentic workflow builder, and we're working with early customers. So we basically took the idea to these early customers and asked, hey, is this useful? And we showed them how it can stop them from wasting time answering repeat questions, or just, digging through old threads and tools for information. And they basically said, well, yeah, honestly, more useful to us than your current product we're using. So that's when we knew this creates value, and when we pivoted to this idea to focus on it.
Right. So we agree that knowledge is the lifeblood of any team. Yet most companies they struggle to retain it, reuse it, and keep it accessible. Let's dig into that. Can you walk us through the core challenges companies face when it comes to retaining and reusing team knowledge?
Of course. I think I think the challenges in retaining team knowledge basically boils down to no consistency in place or time. So place is basically fragmentation, right? Team knowledge nowadays is very much scattered across Slack, Notion, tickets, CRM, emails, a bunch of other tools. So finding the right information is often not that easy. And as you know, like a lot of companies have their internal wikis and information hubs and knowledge bases and whatnot, but those can still be pretty bloated and hard to navigate. And at
Right.
some companies, it's literally someone's job to curate and update those. And I think that process, that manual process, leads to the second biggest challenge, which is the no consistency in time piece. So basically, if the knowledge is not properly updated or curated in time, you will just end up having bad or old information. Or when someone moves to a different project or just leaves the company, that context is lost. So this kind of delay slash turnover is the second biggest challenge I would say in retaining. And those two challenges together basically result in two really big challenges in team reusing knowledge. Like if you cannot reuse, then someone's asking the question again, has to perform a certain task again. There's a recent post on LinkedIn that had 400 thumb ups in like a few days that said, hey Slack, can I request a feature where if someone asks the question and it's being asked and answered before, the Slack bot will just, take the answer from the first time or literally point the asker to the first thread. So you can tell it's a recurring and a common pain point.
Hmm.
So that's kind of like the cannot reuse part. And the using it wrong part is the second biggest challenge, right? That's basically inaccuracies and mistakes. That one is a little more self-explanatory. Like, people maybe maybe they refer to an outdated doc, an old thread, or they ask a coworker who just didn't have the latest guidance. So then they're reusing the wrong information and it kind of creates this cascading effect. So, these challenges in retention and reuse, they're not just annoying, they kill productivity, they waste money. And with AI agents starting to act autonomously to execute tasks, which is another fascinating topic, the cost of missing or incorrect knowledge just compounds even faster. So, teams definitely want to avoid that.
Right. So what we understand is Miilab act like an AI collective brain. For our listener, what does an AI collective brain actually mean in practice?
Yeah, I'm happy to elaborate. That I find that term really amusing because it almost makes us sound like mad scientists. But what we mean by the AI collect like a team brain, what we're trying to build for teams, it's basically a self-learning, adaptive memory and context layer powered by AI and used for AI agents and humans. So the few things it does, one, it auto captures knowledge from work as work happens over email, Slack, Notion, whatever tools your teamwork happens on, without you scripting, without you training or retraining. It auto captures that knowledge. Then it remembers over time, right? That's what the human brain does. It remembers information. And in that process, compounds the context instead of like resetting every conversation. Can you imagine if we're having this podcast and before every question, you have to reintroduce yourself and the context of the podcast to me again? How frustrating would that be? And most AI agents today actually operate with that premise.
Right.
So then lastly, once you've captured the knowledge, you've remembered it and contextualized it correctly, it can be used to answer your Slack questions or someone else's questions over email, and it can provide instructions to an AI agent or a workflow automation. And that's also part of the platform and the agents we offer. So again, that's essentially what the agents that are powered by persistent memory can do. It captures, it remembers, and it instructs. And I think one thing I want to call out that it's not just kind of another database with information with the chatbot to surface, the information. Because a lot of the broader space right now is still largely focused on search, which is, better retrieval, better indexing, catalogs, and the biggest players which are phenomenal companies, like Glean, Glean, super amazing. But their main selling point is still pulling many data sources and indexing the data efficiently. So by
Right.
default, it still primarily relies on indexing, relies on RAG, which, I touched on a little bit. And that search has fundamental limitations in learning and adapting. So what we're building, the adaptive memory, it doesn't just store, it extracts useful information, understands it, organizes it, use it to answer, to anticipate, to instruct. And the real power comes when your whole org shares this unified, consistent context. And that's how you eliminate repeat questions and keep everyone aligned. And the last thing I'll say on this topic is I think it's crucial because this is what can future-proof your organization. Like the memory is not just for people, right? Like you and I think we probably share the conviction that AI agents will take over certain tasks and not just one agent, like a fleet of agents across functions, operate and collaborate in a whole agentic system at a company. So they will need a constantly updating source of truth to operate effectively. And that's the collective brain we're building, and its context guides both humans and agents.
Right. So just to give a basic overview, if you're working in customer care and I reach out to you and I ask you, what is the status of my integration? So basically in few seconds, you can dig out Slack thread, you can check the CRM and reply in few seconds about my query, right?
Actually, that's a great example because we have a real life example like that I'll share. But just to address what you said briefly, you're absolutely right. Because you're not checking those, like you're not checking the emails in the database and the CRMs live. You're not like retrieving it again because you've lost the context. You're trying to find the index, the information again. The memory graph, the memory layer, is constantly updating itself. Memory graph is fundamentally different in the sense that it's sort of like extracting useful information all the time as information gets just captured, ingested, and it's like constructing a more effective architecture live. So it's
Right.
like it's not even storing. I think one interesting thing I think about is you think about RAG and search, like it's storing your information like chunks of raw information. That's not what a memory graph would do. It would actually extract live and try to pick out the useful information, if you will, and the connections between them. That's how
Right.
you massively speed up this retrieval process. So and I'll use that as a segue to say, so you give this example of customer support, right? I think that's a great example. So the Miilab agents, the AI agents, will not only remember the solution, maybe if this is the first time this has been asked and done,
Mm,
this human agent's answer and solutions would be picked up as the answer, right? But from this point onward, no
mm,
one on your team should be answering a repeat question, should be struggling, should be digging through. So the Miilab agent will remember the solution, and the next time it comes up, it will flag similar patterns in the new tickets. It will surface the resolution instantly for like a different rep,
right.
and probably even before the rep searches for anything. So or like a lead receives some updated policy and in a CX context could be about discount or refund. And before the lead even goes to send an email or Slack message to all his or her rep, Miilab has already thought of and anticipated this next step and drafted up the email or Slack just for like hitting approval or send. So I'll
Right.
pause here. Seems like you had some thoughts.
Yeah, so it will never hallucinate, basically.
I didn't want to drop like words like hallucination. It's a very hot buzzword, but correct.
Mm,
The point is that because I think the way I typically share with some of my friends, like in an overly simplistic way, why bots hallucinate, it really boils down, it cannot find the relevant information. Therefore,
correct.
it starts stringing words that seem relevant together. And
Mm,
that's the fundamental limitation I kind of alluded to. If you cannot retrieve for something that doesn't exist. But if
mm,
you're learning live, sorry, if the agent is learning live, it doesn't have that tendency to to like make things up anymore. It's just it will say I don't know for the first time, but from that point onward, it will
mm.
be stored in the memory the right way and like pulled out to be used the right way.
Right. Okay. So, what are the teams or industries seeing the biggest transformation with this collective brain model?
Yeah, I think basically the operational teams, because basically we're kind of tackling like teamwork for knowledge worker, if you will. So
Mm,
any of the operational teams where a lot of teamwork happens,
mm,
specifically, I would say customer service, kind of
mm,
sales org, go to
mm,
market, account management, some product management, product ops as well. So these
mm,
teams, if you think about it, they live in a constant flow of information. They're
mm,
fielding endless questions. They update details on the fly, but often they don't have the time or easy tools to
mm,
properly codify and share what they know.
mm,
Um, so like, earlier I said that the two biggest challenges in knowledge retention are fragmentation and delay and
mm,
loss. So
mm,
think about these like operational teams, for example, as startups, which is like us, right? Like they
mm,
operate at a very high velocity. They feel
mm,
the pain of the delay and loss part more acutely, the
mm,
context switching and the slips. And at the
mm,
enterprise scale, you kind of have the problem flip. So
mm,
information is abundant, but they're
mm,
fragmented across silos and systems.
mm,
And that's why companies kind of on both ends of the spectrum need that brain, which is a continuously
mm,
updated context and memory layer. And I will
right.
say, looking ahead,
Mm,
companies that will lean into using groups of AI agents
mm,
will see the most transformation that will benefit the most. Like think of the AI native companies, or
mm,
large scale, again, customer support orgs, logistics, actually financial services. You built in fintech, I
mm,
really believe, because
mm,
financial services, there are a lot of kind of repeat questions and recurring tasks.
mm,
So without a shared brain feeding the AI agent's consistent guidance, you'll end up with a lot of chaos. So you really need
mm.
that layer.
So, could you share a success story, maybe a client who radically improved onboarding speed or reduced repeated mistakes?
We have a customer that I would say industry probably broadly falls into workforce management. So they were looking to scale their support team because it's a fast growing startup, so their growth
Mm,
is strong.
mm,
And we just they wanted to scale their support team, and we asked, hey, do you want to scale your customer support with the Miilab agent instead of like scaling the headcount? And they
mm,
said, yeah. So they've since scaled customer support, or sorry, they've since scaled basically the volume they're able to, the ticket volume they're able to support the customers they're serving by
mm.
400%. So they 4x'd what they can serve at a
Right.
tiny fraction of the cost of what an additional customer service rep
Mm,
would have incurred them because the
mm.
Miilab agent just handles the repetitions intelligently and not just when their customers reach out to the points of contacts, right? But also when internally, when they need to align and check on the answers and policies to get back to the customer.
So let's shift gears to Miilab's own journey. You have built the product. Now comes scaling. Over the next 12 to 18 months, what are Miilab's main growth priorities?
Ooh, I think that's $1 million question for every founder.
Mm,
Um, I would say there's three. So the first one is, our market, I guess like market customer growth priority is definitely to expand design partners and customer base. So
mm,
moving, like serving our fast growing startup community well. We like working with them because they're very innovative and sort of
mm,
adaptive to kind of a new operating norms, right? But we
mm,
also really want to enter like mid-market and enterprise CX and ops.
mm,
Very, very lucky for us, very fortunate that one of the leading venture capital firms like Norwest put us on their market map for companies that are reshaping customer service. So I think this is a space that is due for disruption. It's always been a hot space, but even
mm,
more disruption from AI.
mm,
So expanding, our design partners and customer base, that would be priority number one in terms of market. And I would say like our product priority, which will, fundamentally decide how fast we can scale and serve and grow our customer is enhancing the memory engine. So want to kind of evolve it from reactive recall more and more towards the predictive intelligence. And that's always part of the
mm.
value prop, but to build that engine even stronger so that, like knowledge surfaces proactively in the flow of work and more suggestions and workflows can be triggered automatically with higher confidence. Because,
Right.
like our product builds a sort of like a auto mode where you kind of let it run and like an approval mode where obviously the human. So we want to make sure like we build both to be more robust because human in the loop is still very important.
Mm,
We're definitely like building a BI engine on top of the memory engine. So this way you can essentially act as a like constant kind of like a second CPO, if you will, like drawing, all
mm.
the insights from customers' questions, like just directly and dynamically.
Right.
Lastly, the third one would, again, this is the nerd in me talking, but so MIT's motto is Mansi Manus, which is like brain, like, brain and hands.
Mm,
Um, so we're building both, and that's the reason I mentioned that is when I think about AI agents with persistent memory and context, the memory and context is the mind,
mm,
and the agents are the hands. So
mm,
we're building both the memory and context layer and agents that can act on it. And
mm,
ultimately, I think, for a company, when you offer this kind of package in a
mm,
unified system, memory as foundation, agents as operator, they can derive
mm.
a lot of value, but we're also building them independently as point solutions for companies that just see a use case in, I want a memory layer to unify everything in my company, but we're yet to sort of like implement a whole agentic system. So we want to make sure we can serve both type of customers technically.
Right. So, as a SaaS founder, you must have tried various growth channels: LinkedIn, inbound, outbound. Which ones didn't deliver as expected, and which one really worked for you?
Mm.
Mm,
That's a good question. I think what's worked well so far, and we're fairly early stage, so I think that makes sense, is just direct founder outreach and our community.
mm,
So our live beta customers and the ones that are in the process of designing for beta are from, our founder outreach, our networks. Actually, another good example is the LinkedIn post I just mentioned, the complaint
Mm.
about questions asked before 400 likes. So the poster has an operational role. It's kind of account executive. And I reached out after seeing the post explaining how we're building something that enables him to never answer the same questions twice. He replied immediately and to
Mm.
schedule a meeting the same
Mm.
week.
Mm.
So that's, how I think founder outreach works as soon as you see this pain point. Um, what hasn't worked, I would say, is I think broader, maybe outreach email campaign
Mm.
hasn't it has resulted yielded in a few conversations, but no actual conversion yet. So I think at this stage, like nuance matters a lot. So it's much more about the conversation to understand customers' pains, not just kind of like impression numbers through broader campaigns.
Right. Okay. So, where do you see team memory in 5 years? Will having an AI collective brain becomes as normal as having Slack, Zendesk, or email? How do you
Uh,
see it developing in 5 years' time? Mm.
Yeah, no, I have 100% conviction it will be as normal. I don't even think it will take 5 years, but
Oh, okay.
the way I think about it, right? AI native startups, like the younger innovative companies, I think I mentioned like they can adapt to new corporate operating norms much faster, and that's why we like working with them. But at the same time, like large companies are the ones wrestling with massive data volume and operational complexity. I think
Mm.
many are eager to, or probably do, to
Mm.
modernize their ops with agentic systems, and they have the budget. And so, like I said earlier, those systems only succeed if they run on a layer of context that's always up to date and giving consistent guidance and instructions. So um, I think every company will end up running teams with collective memory, collective brain. And the parallel I think about here is real-time communication at work was normalized with Slack.
Right.
And a few years later, everyone takes it for granted, right? So
Mm.
I believe a living memory and context layer will also be normalized. It will feel as natural and necessary as having email or Slack. And the difference actually from these pure communication tools is memory compounds. The more you use it, the
Mm.
smarter it gets, like the AI gets, and the faster you and your organization become. So I think as
Mm.
soon as teams feel that benefit compound, they'll
Mm.
adopt it very readily.
Right. So, lastly, what is the biggest mistake? And this is particularly for other SaaS founders. What is the
Mm.
biggest mistake you see teams make when it comes to knowledge retention and collaboration?
I think a big one is kind of like treating it as an afterthought, like I'll clean up the notes or docs later, which before AI note-taking tools came around, I was the worst offender.
Uh,
But because like never, like later never comes. So I think that is a big mistake because that causes knowledge to slip through. With memory, though, knowledge can be captured as work happens and can
mm.
always remain up to date. And that's why we didn't want to just build another search tool, right? Search is only useful if someone remembers to capture and to look. And
Mm.
memory makes sure you don't have to do those
Mm.
things. So instead, we build agents to auto capture because memory just shouldn't be a chore. I would say another big one, not maybe not mistake, but challenge is created by this notion that, oh, if I just keep feeding an AI model more and more knowledge, it will become smarter, which is untrue. I mean, there's,
Right.
always the classic trade-off between accuracy and context window size. But even that aside, the real issue is quality, which in this case is context, like what's relevant. So AI
Mm.
and AI agents are only useful when it acts with and in the context of a team's data, work streams, SOPs, contacts, emails, Slacks.
Mm.
So that's why building it with memory and context is critical because challenges don't just occur in retaining. It
Mm.
also it's also how you activate the knowledge, how you kind of
Mm.
structure and deliver it so the team collaboration is smarter and faster.
Right. Okay. So, Catherine, this has been a fascinating conversation from the vision of a collective brain to the very practical steps companies can take today. Before we close, how can people learn from about Miilab and connect with you? Are you quite active on LinkedIn?
I, I should probably be more active as a founder, but I had definitely replied to outreaches about Meetup, or even if just other fellow founders want to connect, nerd out about the space, or just talk about founding journey. You can find me on LinkedIn anytime. You can email me, which I'll share with you. For maybe your listeners, you can find us on meelab.io. It's just MII lab.io.
So perfect. That's all for today's episode of Scale SaaS. Catherine, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your insight. And to our listener, thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to subscribe and share this episode with colleagues who care about the future of work and AI. Until next time.
Thank you so much, Ali. It's been a pleasure.